Welcome to the On the Ranch episode this week. We had a question by Bill Taylor. How do you know typical, non-typical deer, typical, non-typical times? So we're going to talk a little bit about it. It's so confusing to everybody. I get this question all the time, so I'm going to try to explain it as much as I can. There's several different scoring methods out there right now. There's SCI, there's Buckmasters, there's Boone and Crockett, and every one of them do it a little bit different. I don't like Boone and Crockett. I think that's the stupidest measuring system there absolutely is. And I'll explain to you why I think it's not very smart. But Boone and Crockett basically it's just a book that you pay to get your name in and you pay to keep the name in. I do like the SCI. At least they fight for our hunting rights. That money that you spend to put your animals in that book goes toward hunting and fighting for hunting rights. But I think SCI and Buckmasters is a good one too. I think they give every inch to the deer, and I think they deserve that. They have a gross score, which is non-typical, and they have a net score, which is a typical. They break it down. It's really easy. I'll kind of start going through and trying to tell you a little bit what the differences are. Of course, a drop time is non-typical. There's a lot of people that look at a deer and say, "Boy, that's a typical deer." There's a lot of people that say that's a typical deer, and it is. It's a big typical frame, and that's what at Oak Creek. That's what we try to produce: is big, wide open typical frames. I like that big. Typical frame. I don't mind a few flyers here and there or drop time here or there, but we want that big, wide open, typical frame. Going back to this deer, you've got, in measuring, most everybody does your measuring. They start from the base and then measure your beams, and you get two measurements right there, all the way out to the beams. You go right down the center of your beam and right in through right here. They start right here and go all the way out to your tips. Your next measurements are your times, and you card off across the top of the beam, you card off, and from that center point all the way up is your time length. Now, you can do it from the back or you can do it from the front. And the rule is with SCI, which I'm a master measurer for SCI, so that's kind of what we try to do is and I think most everybody is the same way. The longest point, the deer gets the credit. So if it's 8 inches here and 9 inches here, they get a 9-inch measurement. So that's not cheating. That's just you give the deer the benefit of the doubt. So you got your times, and you go up T1 or G1, or they call them several different ways. But G1, your 2, G2, G3, G4. Is on your mainframe typical. So, or T1, T2, T3, T4. Of course, like I said, this drop time, and this drop time has been broken off. So, it's a non-typical point. This time right here is going to be a non-typical point because it's not coming off the top of the beam. You've got a little bitty sticker back here that's non-typical. This time is non-typical. There's some measurers out there that measure both of these times as typical, and that's wrong. That's not how it's supposed to be. You've got to pick one of these times is coming off the main beam as your typical. Me, I would go T1, T2, T3, T4, and T5. These 3 times are non-typical. Can you call that a deer a typical? A lot of people do. That's a typical looking deer, but in the scoring process, no, because he's got more inches, too many inches. You can have 15 inches of non-typical points. And how you get that is you going back to our measurement, I'll go back to that, I'm sorry, I kind of skipped around. Then you've got your circumference, and once you do your times, you've got your circumferences. So you got circumference 1, or mass measurement 1, I think they call them C1s, C2, C3, C4. So, you've got your measurements, and you only get 4 measurements on a whitetail. Now, elk and other deer animals are different, but if this was an 8-point, say these times weren't here, you would go C1, C2, C3, and you go halfway in the middle of the beam and the last point, and that's your C4. So you might not have a point, and you always want the smallest measurement in this gap. In between this gap, wherever's the smallest is what you give that animal. And then you've got a width. You measure in, you give it a width. I think certain measurement systems don't even give you width. I mean, that's everything. I mean, there's nobody in this world that doesn't look at a 30-inch wide deer and think he's bigger than a 25-inch wide. It might score the same, but man, who doesn't want that big wide deer? And there's some people that don't like width, but for the most part, that's how it is. So going back to your typical or non-typical, you know, this deer is going to gross 238 inches, but you can't count this in your net scores. You have to only give their typical times is their net score, and then you take that by 15. So for easy numbers, if this deer scored exactly 200 inches on a, which is pretty dang close, well, maybe not, but if he net scores 200 inches, then you can multiply that by times 15, and that gives you 30 inches, basically. My math's wrong. It gives you 40 inches. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, 20 would be 40. So it gives you 30 inches. 15% of 200 is 30 inches. So what you can do is, if this deer scored exactly 200 inches, in order to go in a typical book, he could actually score 230 inches with these times added into his gross score. His gross score could be 230 inches, his typical score could be 200 inches, and you could actually enter this deer into a typical category if those numbers came out right. Now, you don't get to add the 230 inches and say he's a 230 inch typical. That's no, and a lot of people do that, and that's wrong. He's going to go into the typical category as a 200 inch typical. So all this gets deducted. He gross scores 230 inches, but his typical score is 200 inches. I hope I'm not going too fast, and I hope that makes sense. So that's kind of where you are. Say he had 40 inches of non-typical. You can't just say, well, I'm not going to turn this time in and this time in and this time in, and that way he's a 200 inch typical. And that happens. I think SCI is going back through the record book. There is a lot of deer that have been turned in the last few years in the top 20 that are not typical deer, and they're cleaning that up supposedly. Got some guys that are just leaving out the non-typical points on these deer, and they're calling them typical. You can't do that. It's not a mainframe deer. I mean, so if that's the case, you can take a deer that's got all this non-typical stuff, subtract all the non-typical, and turn him in. Well, you know, if it's a 600 inch deer and you subtract all the non-typical stuff and he scores 300 inches, he's not a 300 inch typical, you know, and there's a lot of that going on. So hopefully they clean that up. Boone and Crockett will take let me find on their net score, this deer is a good example. This deer has got G2s that are typical G2s. This one is 9 inches long. This one is 10 inches long. So Boone and Crockett, in order to get your G2 measurement, remember this is a G1, this is a G2, this deer would get 9 inches here, but he would only get 9 inches here. You don't get it because they want it perfectly symmetrical. So you would lose that 1 inch in Boone and Crockett's net score. Now, gross score, Boone and Crockett, they would give you the credit. So, what is a typical? What is a non-typical? And the high beholder, I mean, it's your judgment. I call that deer a typical looking deer. But of course, he's got some non-typical stuff on there, so it's going to deduct him down. Okay, and when somebody calls in to book a hunt with me, I try to fill them out, what they're looking for, what they're not looking for. You know, a lot of people say, I want a 250 inch typical. Well, I know they're probably thinking, well, it can have some drop times, it can have some non-typical points, but they want a big framey deer like this deer. You know, that deer is going to score, you know, we already talked about it, probably going to be 340 somewhere in there, but it's wide open, framey, good looking deer. It's got some non-typical points. So, I try to find that out, try to fill them out and find out what they're looking for. A lot of people will say they want a typical deer and they'll get here and they'll shoot 350-inch non-typical. You know, everybody changes their minds and they're more than welcome, but we try to find out. When somebody books with us, that's what I try to find out. Try to find out what type deer they like. You know, do they like a tall deer? Do they like a wide deer? Do they like both? I love it whenever a customer goes to our website and pulls a couple pictures off of it and say, Donald, this is the style deer I want. That doesn't mean I can get that deer for them, but I can, and might jog something in my memory saying, oh, I remember there's a deer over at Zach's that's hanging out over at Zach's field. It looks just like that. And we try to find 5-6 deer that fit their bill for perfect deer and give it to the guides, show them what they're looking for. They go to scouting, they find those 5 or 6 deer, they pattern those 5 or 6 deer. That way when they get here in that 3-day hunt, we've got a head start. We've done our homework, we do our work, and I can't brag on my guides enough. They do a lot of homework. You know, most ranches, you go out there and if they like you hunting in the rut, you know their guide's gonna do a lot of homework. I hate for somebody to come to my ranch in the rut because my guides can't do it. Those deer are chasing and they're moving and they're going to be 8 miles away on the opposite side of the ranch in 4 hours. That you can't pattern. These guys, they pull their hair out during the rut. Yes, we're going to see the nocturnal deer that we don't ever see. These deer are going to pop up and they're going to be big and where all the guys are scrambling and panicking and like, shoot that deer quick, we don't ever see him. You know, that happens. But it's when I can pattern, when my guides can do their homework and pattern those deer and get 5 or 6 deer patterned so when you get here, we know exactly where we're going and we're hoping we've got him on time on their watches. We hope we've got him programmed in. He's going to walk out and we're going to get him shot and you're going to have a great hunt and enjoy life. We're going to go back out and, you know, just because you kill on the first day doesn't mean you have to go home. We want to go back out and we want to look at other deer. We want to do scouting for the next hunter coming in. There's a lot of that goes on. You know, we're always thinking in the back of our head, that deer is going to be a perfect deer for Bill, or that deer is going to be a perfect deer for Miss Chapman. You know, the guides are always working, and that's why they are so good. I hate to brag on them too much, but you know, I've got some good guides. They do a lot of homework. They do a lot of preparation for the hunters before they get here so they can show them a good time. I hope this answered your questions. I can't think of any other questions to ask or to talk about. You know, all of these little points right here, these are non-typical points. You know, this flyer coming off is non-typical. This split's non-typical. That's non-typical. You know, I hope this answers your questions. We saw a lot of deer yesterday. Marty has got some unbelievable trail camera pictures coming up. Make sure you go to our website under what's it under, Marty?
It's under the hunting and it's in the gallery section.
In the photo galleries. We've got trail camera, we've got hunting. You can go through and you can pick on 2017 or 2018 trail camera pictures. You can go through and look at all the 2017 deer we harvested, 16 deer we harvested, and the trail cameras for each of those deer. See how they're growing, see how much they're getting better. But this year is, guys, if you like typicals, oh my gosh, you're going to be amazed at what you're fixing to see on that Facebook or on Facebook and the website. I am so proud of our mature deer this year. They're just big, pretty, basket rack, just lots more mass. Long tines. I mean, the tine length is unreal. If we don't have some world record typicals this year, I will be really, really surprised. Enjoy. I hope you are enjoying this. We're enjoying doing it for you. I'm just ready for hunting season, and we're just a few weeks away, so it won't be long. We'll see you next week.